The morning of June 9, 1982, broke quietly over the Bekaa Valley. The sun rose without ceremony, spilling pale gold across the mountains of eastern Lebanon, illuminating rows of olive trees and the long, straight roads that cut through the valley floor. From a distance it looked peaceful, almost untouched. But beneath that calm sky, engines were warming, radar screens were glowing to life, and men were preparing themselves for a kind of battle the world had never truly seen before. High above the valley, the air was already alive with invisible tension. The faint hum of jet turbines drifted across the mountains like an approaching storm no one could yet hear. In hardened shelters and air bases across Syria, pilots pulled on their flight suits, checked their helmets, and climbed into the cockpits of MiG-21s and MiG-23s, machines they trusted with their lives. These were not amateurs. They were veterans of years of conflict, trained under Soviet doctrine, drilled to intercept, engage, and destroy. They believed the sky belonged to them. For years, Syria had prepared for this moment. The Bekaa Valley had been transformed into one of the most heavily defended airspaces on Earth. Soviet-made surface-to-air missile batteries, SA-2s, SA-3s, and the feared SA-6, were positioned in layered rings, supported by radar stations and command posts. Together, they formed what Syrian commanders believed was an impenetrable shield. Any enemy aircraft that entered would be tracked, targeted, and destroyed. Across the border, Israeli planners saw something very different. They saw a system built on assumptions, on rigid command structures, predictable responses, and technology that had not evolved as quickly as the world around it. They saw a force prepared to fight the last war, not the next one. And they understood that if those assumptions could be shattered, the entire structure would collapse. The contradiction at the heart of the coming battle was stark. On one side stood numbers, discipline, and confidence forged by doctrine. On the other stood integration, flexibility, and a new way of seeing the battlefield itself. It was not merely a clash of air forces. It was a collision between eras. For the Syrian pilots, the sky was a place of honor and duty. Many of them had grown up dreaming of flight, inspired by the belief that mastery of the air meant mastery of fate. Their aircraft, sleek, fast, armed with cannons and missiles, represented national pride. They trusted the ground controllers who guided them, the radars that watched over them, the doctrine that shaped every maneuver. But what they could not see was that the sky itself had changed. Unbeknownst to them, Israeli aircraft were no longer flying as isolated fighters. They were nodes in a living network. High above, E-2 Hawkeye airborne warning aircraft traced every movement, feeding real-time information to pilots hundreds of kilometers away. Electronic warfare planes quietly mapped Syrian radar emissions, identifying their frequencies, their blind spots, their weaknesses. Drones, small, expendable, and revolutionary, were already in the air, teasing Syrian defenses into revealing themselves. This was warfare fought as much with electrons as with missiles. As the sun climbed higher, the illusion of control began to crack. Syrian radar operators saw targets appear and disappear, multiply and vanish. Commands were issued, revised, contradicted. Pilots were scrambled, vectored toward contacts that dissolved before their eyes. The system was reacting, but it no longer understood what it was reacting to. And then the first missiles flew. High above the valley, beyond visual range, Israeli pilots launched weapons guided not by what they could see, but by what their systems knew. The missiles streaked through clear blue sky, invisible until the moment they struck. One by one, Syrian aircraft vanished in bursts of flame. For those in the cockpits, confusion turned to disbelief. Warning tones screamed. Radar locks vanished. Wingmen disappeared without warning. Some pilots never saw their attackers at all. They were fighting an enemy that existed everywhere and nowhere at once. The sky, once familiar, had become hostile terrain. What unfolded over the next 2 hours would be remembered as one of the most lopsided air battles in history. 82 Syrian aircraft would be destroyed. Not a single Israeli fighter would be lost in air-to-air combat. The imbalance was so extreme it seemed almost unreal, as if one side had been allowed to glimpse the future while the other remained trapped in the past. Yet this was not simply a story of superior machines defeating outdated ones. It was a story of mindset, of how wars are no longer won by courage alone, but by understanding, by anticipation, by the ability to see before being seen. As smoke drifted across the Bekaa Valley and the radios fell silent, a new truth settled over the battlefield. The age of the lone pilot, relying on instinct and eyesight, was ending. In its place rose an era where information itself was the decisive weapon. And in that moment, unseen by most of the world, the nature of air warfare changed forever. The valley had been quiet for days, but no one on either side believed that quiet would last. By early June of 1982, the Bekaa Valley had become more than just a stretch of land in eastern Lebanon. It was a chessboard, and every piece on it was already in motion. For Syria, the valley represented both shield and sword. It guarded the eastern approaches to Lebanon and served as the backbone of Syrian influence in the region. Lined across it were some of the most heavily defended air positions in the Middle East. Soviet-made SA-2, SA-3 and SA-6 surface-to-air missile batteries stood in layered formations, overlapping their radar coverage like interlocking shields. Mobile launchers hid among hills and olive groves. Radar vans hummed day and night. To Syrian commanders, the Bekaa was a fortress in the sky, an area no enemy could cross without paying a terrible price. Inside Syrian air bases, pilots prepared with confidence. Many had flown hundreds of hours. They trusted their MiG-21s and MiG-23s, fast and aggressive aircraft built for interception and dogfighting. They trusted the doctrine they had been taught. Ground controllers would guide them to the enemy, vectors would be precise, engagements decisive. It was a system built on obedience, coordination, and discipline. Across the border, however, Israeli planners were looking at the same valley and seeing something very different. They saw predictability. Years of intelligence gathering had mapped Syrian radar frequencies, response times, and command hierarchies. Every antenna had a signature. Every radar sweep had a rhythm. Every decision flowed upward through layers of approval. The system was powerful, but rigid. And rigidity in modern warfare was a vulnerability. Israeli commanders knew they could not win by brute force alone. Syrian numbers were too great. Instead, they prepared something far more dangerous, a battle designed to collapse the enemy's perception of reality. In the weeks leading up to June 9, Israeli squadrons trained relentlessly. Pilots practiced beyond visual range engagements, learning to trust data more than their own eyes. Electronic warfare crews refined jamming techniques that could blind radars without destroying them. Engineers modified drones, unmanned and expendable, to act as decoys, mimicking the radar signatures of real aircraft. This was not a plan to fight the Syrian Air Force. It was a plan to unmake it. The morning of the operation dawned clear and calm. Weather conditions were ideal, high visibility, stable air, no cloud cover to interfere with sensors. As the sun rose, Israeli aircraft began to move quietly and deliberately. Drones were launched first, skimming toward the Bekaa Valley like curious insects. Syrian radar operators noticed the blips almost immediately. Contacts appeared on their screens, multiple targets approaching at varying altitudes. It looked like the beginning of a conventional strike. Alarms were raised. Missile batteries powered up. Radar beams swept the sky, locking onto what appeared to be enemy aircraft. But the targets were illusions. As Syrian radars activated, Israeli electronic warfare systems came alive. Jamming signals flooded the airwaves, distorting returns, creating ghost images, masking real movements. Operators struggled to distinguish real aircraft from false ones. Commands were issued, then revised. The system began to hesitate. That hesitation was fatal. Israeli aircraft, flying low and fast, crossed into the engagement zone under the cover of electronic noise. High above, E-2 Hawkeye command planes watched everything, their radar sweeping hundreds of kilometers in every direction. Data streamed directly into the cockpits of Israeli fighters, painting a live, moving picture of the battlefield. For the Syrian pilots scrambling to intercept, the experience was disorienting. Orders came late or contradicted one another. Radar locks flickered and vanished. Targets appeared and disappeared without explanation. Then the missiles came. Beyond visual range, Israeli pilots launched their weapons, AIM-7 Sparrows and AIM-9 Sidewinders, guided by data rather than sight. The first Syrian aircraft exploded before its pilot ever saw the enemy. Others followed in rapid succession. Confusion spread through Syrian formations. Wingmen lost contact with leaders. Radio channels filled with overlapping voices, warnings, and unanswered calls. Some pilots tried to engage visually, diving toward perceived targets, only to find empty sky. In a matter of minutes, the carefully layered Syrian defense began to unravel. The MiG-21s and MiG-23s were fast, but speed meant little without awareness. Israeli pilots, meanwhile, moved with clinical precision. They rarely broke formation unnecessarily. They fired, disengaged, repositioned, and struck again. Each action was guided by data flowing from sensors far beyond the horizon. For the Syrian pilots, the sky became hostile in a way no training had prepared them for. There was no clear enemy to face, no dogfight to win through skill and courage. The battle was being decided invisibly by machines talking to machines. Some pilots fought desperately to regain control. They flew low, hugging the terrain, hoping to escape radar. Others climbed, searching for visual contact. A few managed to fire missiles, but most found their targets already gone, or never there at all. As the minutes passed, losses mounted. Aircraft fell in flames across the valley floor. Parachutes blossomed briefly in the air, then drifted down into a battlefield still alive with electronic warfare. Radio calls grew frantic. Command centers struggled to understand what was happening. Within 2 hours, the sky was effectively empty. 82 Syrian aircraft had been destroyed. Not a single Israeli fighter had been lost in air-to-air combat. The silence that followed was almost surreal. Where minutes earlier the sky had roared with engines and explosions, now there was only the hum of electronics and the distant echo of retreating aircraft. For the Syrians, the psychological impact was devastating. Pilots returned shaken, some in tears, others silent. Many could not comprehend how the battle had unfolded so quickly or so completely. The systems they had trusted had failed them utterly. For Israel, the victory was overwhelming, but sobering. The operation had succeeded beyond expectations, yet it revealed a new kind of warfare, one that demanded constant adaptation. Technology had delivered supremacy, but it also imposed a relentless need to stay ahead. The world took notice. Military analysts across East and West studied the battle in detail. Air forces rewrote their doctrines. The age of purely mechanical air combat was over. The future belonged to networks, sensors, data fusion, and electronic dominance. The Bekaa Valley became a case study taught in war colleges for decades to come. It marked the moment when air combat ceased to be a contest of pilots alone and became a contest of systems, information, and perception. For those who had flown that day, however, the lessons were more personal. Some remembered the fear of flying blind. Others remembered the strange calm of superiority. All remembered the moment when the sky itself seemed to choose a side. And in that choice, the world crossed a threshold, from an age where wars were fought by men and machines, to one where victory belonged to those who could see, decide, and strike before the enemy even knew a battle had begun. The echoes of that day did not fade with the smoke over the Bekaa Valley. Long after the last contrails dissolved into the blue, the consequences of what had happened continued to ripple outward, across borders, doctrines, and generations of military thought. The battle was over in hours, but its meaning would take decades to fully surface. For the Syrian pilots who survived, the experience lingered like a shadow. Some returned to their bases in silence, unable to explain what they had faced. Others carried the weight more visibly, haunted by moments when warning lights screamed without reason, when missiles came from nowhere, when comrades vanished in mid-sentence over the radio. They had entered the sky believing skill and courage would be enough. They returned knowing that the rules had changed, and that bravery alone could no longer guarantee survival. In the aftermath, Syrian airfields grew quiet. Training resumed, but with uncertainty. Confidence had been replaced by caution. The old certainties, about doctrine, about technology, about parity with the enemy, were gone. The Air Force that had once been a symbol of national strength now stood as a reminder of vulnerability. And behind that vulnerability lay a deeper realization, that the world had moved forward without them. Across the region, military observers took note. What had happened in the skies over Lebanon was not just an Israeli victory, it was a revelation about the future of war itself. The battle marked the moment when information overtook firepower, when the unseen became more decisive than the visible. Radar, data links, electronic warfare, and real-time coordination had reshaped the very geometry of combat. For the United States and its allies, the implications were profound. The success of American-built aircraft was not merely a triumph of engineering, but of integration, of systems designed to work together seamlessly. Radar spoke to aircraft. Aircraft spoke to each other. Pilots became part of a living network, guided not only by instinct but by a constantly evolving picture of the battlefield. Yet even in victory there was a quiet unease. Military thinkers understood that the advantage revealed in 1982 would not last forever. Technology, once demonstrated, spreads. Adversaries adapt. The same tools that had given one side dominance could, in time, be turned against them. And so the battle became a warning as much as a triumph. In the decades that followed, air forces around the world reshaped themselves in response to what had happened in the skies over Lebanon. New doctrines emerged emphasizing information dominance, joint operations, and rapid decision-making. Stealth technology advanced. Unmanned systems took to the air. The pilot, once the sole master of his aircraft, became part of a vast, invisible web of sensors and signals. Yet for all the technological progress, the human element remained unchanged. Behind every radar screen was a person making decisions under pressure. Behind every cockpit canopy was a human being facing fear, responsibility, and uncertainty. The battle in the Bekaa Valley did not erase the human cost of war, it merely shifted where that cost was paid. For the Syrian pilots, the loss was not only aircraft and comrades, but faith in a system they had trusted. For the Israelis, victory came with the sobering knowledge that superiority is temporary, and that tomorrow's enemy would be studying today's success with equal intensity. History rarely announces its turning points. Often they pass in moments that seem ordinary at the time, another sortie, another mission, another day of fighting. But in hindsight, certain moments stand apart, illuminated by the clarity of consequence. The air battle over the Bekaa Valley was one of those moments. It marked the end of an era when wars in the sky were decided by speed and bravery alone. It marked the beginning of an age where information, integration, and foresight would determine victory long before the first missile was fired. And perhaps most importantly, it revealed a deeper truth about modern conflict, that power no longer lies solely in strength, but in understanding. In seeing the battlefield not as it appears but as it truly is. As the years passed, the wreckage of that battle faded into the earth, and new conflicts drew the world's attention elsewhere. But the lesson endured, written not in monuments or medals, but in doctrines, simulations, and silent calculations made in command centers around the globe. The sky over the Bekaa Valley returned to quiet, its blue once again uninterrupted. Yet for those who know its story, that silence still carries echoes, of jets screaming through thin air, of systems colliding, of a moment when the future arrived without warning. In the end, the battle did more than change how wars are fought. It revealed something timeless about human conflict, that every generation believes it has mastered war, until the next one proves otherwise. And in that realization lies the enduring lesson of that day, one written not in victory or defeat, but in the relentless evolution of human ingenuity itself.